Today I asked the class to take a look at this slide. There's two objects on this slide, and I asked the class the question, what do you see? But I think what I was really trying to get at was, how do you see in combination to what do you see? A lot of responses that I received were two black lines. Somebody said it looked like a railroad track. Someone said it looked like an ice cream sandwich. Someone said two skinny black rectangles. And then I asked the class, how many lines do they see, or did they see? And I got a lot of answers that said two, or some wild number. But I asked the class to take a look at this, considering the negative space that flows between the two black lines. And I said to the class, at least three lines appear to me. We have the two black lines, and then we have the implied line created by the negative space between them. So at least three lines. And this is just a reminder to consider the negative space in the background as an important element to the frame, or the photo frame. Then we did a little bit of jury duty. I had the class evaluate some different pictures. And first of all, when you evaluate pictures or do jury duty for me, I want you to pay attention to the elements. Elements include color, line, shape, form, texture, things like negative space, darkness and lightness of tones, things like that, things that you can see. When starting to analyze a picture, I'd also like you to pay attention to the negative space first, because we often forget to do that. We usually lock on to a person's face or whatever the subject is, and we forget to pay attention to the background. Now, people in class pointed out this orange color here, green. Somebody mentioned the white up here. And our eyes are usually drawn to the brightest part of a photo first. Some people in the class suggested that the lines created in the bricks here are leading lines that lead our eyes to the subject. Perhaps the window does as well. Overall, I think, though, the class agreed that there are some distractions in the negative space or the background, which maybe tend to hurt more than help this picture overall. Now, as far as our positive space, our focal point are the two girls here, and someone in class mentioned that there's a contrast, the blonde and the dark hair here. There's a contrast in color. I suggested that the two of them together almost create a pyramid or pyramidal shape. Taking a look at this one, things that were pointed out in class, the two people in the center of the photo or the frame, these lines, either by the curb or the white lines here, pointing to our secondary subjects in the background here. Someone noticed that there are a couple things that seem to appear growing out of the subject's head. And somebody mentioned the sign as things that maybe are distracting about our attention, not focusing so much on the subject, but on the background. Notice how much space the negative space takes up, or the background takes up, compared to our subject. In this picture, again, we looked at the negative space first. Quite a few distracting elements. The sign also kind of is distracting. Perhaps some people think, though, that those lines lead to our subject, so we'll go with that. Someone mentioned that the whiteness up here acts like a river of negative space, kind of pushing our eyes towards our subject's face. That sounds reasonable. And then looking at our subject here, the color contrast with the rest of the frame really draws our eyes to the center here. Our eyes are again drawn to the brightest area of the frame first. Looking at this one, we kind of talked about the lines that the sidewalk creates, and our discussion in class kind of centered around the fact that maybe a different angle would have been better. The lines do seem to draw some attention to our subject, but perhaps in a different angle those lines could have been better used. There are lines in the background, perhaps, that are drawing our eyes to their subject, but there's a lot of them, and there's lots of different shapes in the background. I think our overall class impression was that the background is a little bit distracting. Now the camera case seems to be a second focal point to this picture. Some liked it there and some didn't. Some thought it was too distracting. I kind of like it. It implies maybe her next move to pick that up implies maybe some future action or motion. And finally, notice how much space our subject takes up. She is symmetrically placed in the photo. Not necessarily a bad thing, but for sure she is not taking up much of the frame, and so perhaps that would be an improvement. This next photo, it looks like the tree dominates the frame. I think that wasn't the intention though. In this photo, this tree creates kind of like a frame to the picture. It's a huge shape and line on the side. I think it helps bring attention to our subject. Some people felt that the columns and the windows are leading lines to our subject's face. Although it was an interesting comment by someone that it seems to have the same kind of monochromatic or similar color scheme in the whole photo, and that person commented that maybe the subject should have been maybe wearing a different colored sweater or something to bring more attention to her. And then finally here, line of the sidewalk bringing attention to the subject. That's a good example of leading line. All right, we're going to move right on to the Power of Three presentation. The number 3 has significance to a lot of people. In some cases it has religious significance. It does for me. Some people take this concept of the Power of Three maybe to an exaggerated viewpoint. I'm going to talk a little bit about how 3 is used in photography, in painting, and just how we come across it in our daily lives. The concept of 3 occurs naturally in our daily lives. For instance, when we refer to 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large. Or how many parts there are to a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Or the parts to a play. Often there is a 3-act structure to a play. And you probably can fill in the blanks here. 3 little pigs, faith, hope, and charity or love. Blood, sweat, and tears. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So for writers and artists, the number 3 can be a pleasing number. It's very convenient and helpful to group things in numbers of 3. But getting back to photography, I'm going to talk about how the power of 3 is used by photographers to draw our attention in closer to our photograph and to pull us in. And this also has to do with what's called the golden spiral. Now the golden spiral idea suggests that as we look at a picture, if it's well composed or if it's well created, the eyes keep being drawn in farther and farther in. So there's eye movement, and then our eye movement travels until we get to the intended focal point. I'm going to say that this happens in 3 stages, but this idea of the spiral is known as the golden spiral, and many hundreds, if not 1,000 years ago, there was a belief that beauty could be determined mathematically. And this is also known as the golden ratio, the divine proportion, but we'll stay with the golden spiral. Here's an example of the spiral. We've seen this picture before, the spiral staircase. But it seems like there's kind of 3 stages or regions that our eyes travel. Our eyes tend to travel from left to right, so here's the left side of the photo. Here's kind of the second stage, and then our eyes are pulled in farther into the image in stage 3. In this image by the same photographer, there seems to be 3 stages or regions that our eyes travel through. Going down the staircase, going farther down the staircase into a spiral motion, and then into the background, which happens to be maybe our focal point, the road and the bicyclist. Well, the power of 3, for me, also pertains to the 3 picture planes that are found in dynamic or well-composed photos. There's three different grounds. There's a foreground, middle ground, and background element, usually to photos that have good depth and that are well-composed or well-designed. So in this picture that we've seen already, let's say the foreground is number 1, the middle ground is 2 in this area, and 3 is the background. I wouldn't say this photo that we've already seen is the best composed photo or the best design, but it does reveal or reflect some elements of the power of 3 or the 3 grounds. Our subject is the foreground, it's the closest thing to the camera. The two girls at number 2 here, that would be our middle ground, perhaps this tree as well. And the background is the horizon and also maybe these elements that are appearing to come out of her head. So there's a perception of depth here. This line by the curb really helps create that impression that this photo is three-dimensional. Also remember the vanishing point. It seems like the vanishing point is out in the distance behind number 2. So that pulls our eyes in. And that's perhaps why some of the kids in class said that they looked at the 2 girls first instead of looking at number 1. Now I asked both classes if this photo had a foreground, middle ground, and background, and some kids said yes, and some said no. My overall impression of this photo is it's very flat. It doesn't have very much dimension. After I read the title of our school here, I really am not pulled into the photo any farther. My eyes really don't travel very much. So for me, it's really one-dimensional. It doesn't really pull me in. Let's look at a famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci, his masterpiece called The Last Supper. Now he seemed to be really into this power of 3 thing. Now besides a foreground, middle ground, and background, there are many examples inside of this painting that reflect the power of 3. I'd like you to pause the video for a little bit and see how many examples of 3 that you can find. All right, some things that were pointed out, although there are so many here that I haven't seen yet, and I keep discovering new ones, especially from you guys. For instance, we have 3 windows in the back, 3 lines here. You notice the edge of the tablecloth, there's 3 stripes on that side and 3 stripes over here. 3 different walls, there's 3 columns right there. Arrangement of the plates, there's 3 main plates, all kinds of things. Now we have these lines in the foreground that direct our attention to the center. In the center of the image, this is where our vanishing point is, right behind Jesus' head. You should notice the shape of the arms and the head crate is a triangle. Well, that shape is all over this image. And you probably thought of groups of 3 here. There's 4 groups of 3 that create these triangles or pyramids. And I know from just looking at a couple other of Da Vinci's masterpieces that sometimes he composes his subjects in this pyramidal design. So he was really into 3. Well, this takes us to photography and the specific rule known as the rule of thirds. In the rule of thirds, imagine the frame divided into horizontal and vertical lines that divide the frame into 3 vertical parts, 3 horizontal parts, and where these lines intersect, where you see the red dots or reddish-orange dots, according to the rule of thirds, this suggests that our subject should be placed at one of these intersections, at one of these dots. In a symmetrically composed photo with the subject in the center, you can get some nice results, but according to the rule of thirds, you can create more emphasis on the focal point, or our main subject, by placing our subject at one of these points. It's like this negative space is pushing our eyes over here, and so we're creating more emphasis this way. It also makes our eyes move from right to left in this case, or from left to right. If we look at this picture, the main subject almost makes that intersection point. In the picture of the puppy, he's right there, his eye is right there where that intersection point is.